Today I'm just some housekeeping as well for um just let you know that what I'll do is I'll ask you throughout the study any comments, and that's probably best when to ask you questions or give a comment to add to the study, if you don't mind, instead of interrupting or putting hands up that don't get seen, if that's okay. Thank you. So my study today is about the weakness of Roe. I'll also touch on a proposed United States federal law that would have codified Roe. And lastly, I think I'll touch on an event that happened during COVID crisis regarding other nations following the footsteps of the United States regarding abortion. So just three things there. So this proposed federal law is called the Freedom of Choice Act. You can hear me okay, everybody? Someone can just say you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, Natalie.
Thank you. So the Freedom of Choice Act. So I'll not go into the background too much in any detail, just to say that it was first introduced. So I'm just going to put FOCA. So it was first introduced into Congress in 1989. Oh, what am I doing? Okay. So that was due to, at the time in 1989, some feared that Roe v. Wade might be imminently overturned as a result of ongoing federal litigation over abortion related laws and restrictions. So this was right at the beginning of our timeline, reform line of the priests, or 144,000. So the Freedom of Choice Act supporters have argued that if passed by Congress, it would have had an unprecedented impact on a state level in the ability to limit and regulate abortion. So we see now with Roe overturned that it's back to the states, and the Freedom of Choice Act would have helped regulate, was kind of limit and regulate abortion at a state level. So we see how that would have helped individuals today if it would have been passed into law. So let's just look at some positive, I'll go through this quickly, some positive points of the Freedom of Choice Act. So, see my board yet? So the first one, it would have codify Roe. When I say Roe, I'm assuming everybody knows what we're talking about. Roe v. Wade, 1973, that established a right to abortion for women. It would have Second one, it would have prohibited federal or state government interfering with reproductive rights. So, like I said, it would have limited what they could do at the state level. So it would have prohibited at a fed and state level. And the third one, it would have codified abortion regardless of fetal viability. As long as this was to do with, in the document, it was saying that it would have allowed these things if, especially the third one, as long as it was necessary to protect a woman's life. And we know that's quite an issue right now. Even in some states, it's a total ban. They're not really, there's cases about women dying and so forth. It's not protecting a woman's life, and this would have assured that. Fourth one, so it would have prevented government entities from discrimination against individuals that exercise their reproductive rights. So it would have included women, obviously transgender and non-binary individuals. So it would have prevented discrimination. I've put trans, non-binary. Probably can't see what I'm writing anyway. Okay. Any questions about that so far? Any comments? So the Freedom of Choice Act was introduced, as I said, in 1989 into Congress, but it was also introduced in other years. It was introduced in the 90s. It was introduced in 2004, 7, 12, 14. As I said, in response to state level restrictions and abortion access. So the Freedom of Choice Act, it's been an ongoing controversy, like with pro-choice and pro-life held and opposing views. And the main goal of the Freedom of Choice Act is obviously a fundamental right to abortion, it was basically to strengthen the court's decision of Roe v. Wade, as I've already said. Some say that Roe was very weak, and some in Congress were seeking to prevent the states from enacting laws prohibiting abortion, as I've already mentioned. Back then, and just before Roe was overturned, the right of abortion was in the 14th Amendment. Can anyone tell me where in the 14th Amendment the right to abortion came?
I don't know the specific clause, but it was the clause number, but it was the right to privacy.
Yeah, thanks, Curtis. Do you say privacy, Curtis?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, it was from it was a due process situation as well as why it was overturned in the 14th Amendment. In 1989, the Freedom of Choice Act's version, that document, that law that was meant to go in to codify Roe, included the section, as I said, permitting states to impose requirements medically necessary to protect the life and health of a woman. And as I said, we can see that would have really been a good law to have had in, because the states wouldn't have been able to do what they're doing today. Some believed, as I said, that Roe in 1973 wasn't enough to protect women's choice of abortion, especially as back then the the states maintained an interest in protecting the unborn later in pregnancy, and could enact laws protecting the unborn and restricting abortion in the second and third trimesters. So I'll go into it in a minute about when I talk about the weakness of Roe, about the trimesters. Over the years, so the Freedom of Choice Act was repeatedly reintroduced and unchanged until 1993, where a section providing medically, as I said, necessary regulations were removed. So they were in to probably help what was going on today, but then they were removed in 1993, probably to try and get it pushed in. A version of the bill was reintroduced in 2007, and one of the first things that Barack Obama promised to do while running for presidency was to sign the Freedom of Choice Act into law if he won. He also stated that throughout his career, as he was running for presidency, he'd been a consistent and strong supporter for reproductive freedom and justice. In one of his statements, I think he said, if men were having babies, we'd have different policies. So he was very pro-choice, Barack Obama. But after his first 100 days in office, it was obvious he had broke his promise of putting the Freedom of Choice Act into law. And sadly, when asked about it, he quoted saying, "It's not his highest legislative priority." Obama went on to he went as global routes, doing good things that health centres. And I think it's some things with Medicaid or Medicare with regards to making sure businesses had cover for contraceptives and for employees and things like that. And I think that's where the landmark case of Lobby Hobby came in at 2014, which was a significant point to watch in our reform lines. So that was a little bit about Barack Obama. With the Freedom of Choice Act, he could have done more. Can anyone I just mentioned the global gag rule regarding reproductive health. We know Trump in his first term reinstated it. So what is it? Does anyone remember? Bit of a memory test what the global gag rule was and is? So it refers to US policy that restricts foreign assistance to organizations that provide support and counsel for abortions. So it's global. So it's Trump or whoever had it signed it, because I know Biden took it out. They stopped this providing money or finance support about counsel and abortions. It was first introduced in 1984 by Reagan's administration. I think I've talked about the global gag rule in my gag rule in my one of my presentations in the past. I think it's called the Mexican policy today, but it's still the global gag rule. So it flips back and forth when we get different presidents. On January the 24th, 2025, Trump administration reinstated the global gag rule, which was one of the first things they did, which was to set back, obviously, I think, healthcare and gender equality and human rights. It was a big setback for that. There was when I was looking at the gag rule again, there was a gag rule back in the time of slavery. It wasn't about abortion, but it was about those helping slaves. It sparked significant debate due to trying to silence those who were anti-slavery from taking the issue up or talking about it. So we've seen issues, haven't we, in the press recently with those trying to help women get out of state abortions. I think I mentioned it in one of my last presentations months ago, the life of conception for female men and personhood. I think I mentioned it in that one about how I was comparing slavery in 1850 and abortion issues about women, slaves having to trying to escape, and how women would have to leave states and stuff to get abortions if they were banned in their states. And I said it would be similar in our time with regards to abortion. So there were some arrests made in some states recently, with people helping women get abortions out of the state. There was a case, a court case in the Supreme Court. It was the state of Alabama who was trying to arrest people helping women, and the Supreme Court restrained that court case, and it was a win for women and abortion rights and anyone who wanted to help them, to be honest. And that was in Alabama. There's a saying, what starts in Alabama doesn't stay in Alabama. And I think that's true, because a lot of serious restrictions and laws that come out end up starting there and then escalate to other states. So as I say, that was a win for all women, that case. Any comments so far? Anything you want me to repeat? Or
This global thing, it hasn't come to us, has it? Here. I don't know.
The global gag rule?
Yeah.
Yes,
We haven't got,
it was reinstated by Trump in 2017, and then Biden came and took it away in 21, and then Trump, one of his first jobs in this second term now, he reinstated the global gag rule, so they don't give
yeah,
him funds. Yeah, so it is, Deb, it's
yeah.
back.
So I know, but is it in our nation?
The global gag. I don't think.
Is it just, does it just affect? I know it says global and everything, but
Yeah,
is
it
it?
affects. I don't know if it affects UK at the moment. I haven't looked into which countries. It's definitely places like Africa and places like that.
Oh, right. So,
Whoever they give funds to, I'm not sure about America giving funds to the UK regarding
that's what I
abortion,
thought.
but we know that the tariffs will come around
Yeah,
to do with that as well. I think, that saying where it says you can't buy or sell. I mean, Trump's just manipulating countries.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So if we go right back to the time at the end, we go to 1989. And I think, that the start of the six, and we parallel it with the Seven Kingdom. They knew that women's rights would blame the Sixth Kingdom. They knew that women's rights of abortion, Roe, was weak. They knew that it needed strengthening. That's where the Freedom of Choice Act came in. People could see, pro-choice activists and Democrats could see how weak Roe was. The 1773 Roe v. Wade. Around that time, also, we started seeing SCOTUS nominations being put forth that were pro-life justices that didn't help women's rights. So I haven't looked too deep into it, but we had Reagan, obviously, in 1989. He put forth many different court judges and stuff, but he did put forth the originalist Antonio Scalia, which had an effect on the Supreme Court, especially with regards to, you know, originalism and things like that. Then we had Bush. He put forth Justice Clarence Thomas, and then, the damage he's been doing. And then he put forth Justice Alito, who have done the most damage to women's rights and LGBTQ in the past 50 years. So I'm just talking about presidents here, what they've done with the Supreme Court, how they've helped or not helped women's rights and gender equality. Then we had sort of Bill Clinton. Even though he was a Democrat, he he could have reversed the Hyde Amendment, but he didn't. He didn't put it in his budget. I spoke about the Hyde Amendment before in another presentation. Does anyone remember what the Hyde Amendment was about? So it stopped federal funds being used for paying for abortion, except in cases of rape, incest, or to save the life of a woman. Depending on who or is in the White House, um, it goes back and forth, a bit like the global gag rule. The Hyde Amendment goes back and forth depending if it's a right wing, left wing presidency. So the Hyde Amendment is also getting used today and abused towards women's rights. In 1992, an abortion rights advocate also pulled up Bill Clinton on a quote he made. He just said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. And many abortion rights advocates argue that calling a procedure to be rare places stigma on people who seek one, especially low income families, LGBTQ, and immigrants. So Bill Clinton wasn't even though he was pro choice, he could have done more and he didn't do a lot, except I think he did a lot by introducing, putting forth Ruth Bader Ginsburg to become the Supreme Court Justice. Now, I'll call her RBG if you don't mind. She was good for equality even before she became a Supreme Court Justice. Just to remind you, in case you didn't know, she was the co founder of ACLU, American Civil Rights Union, who have done and continue to do such great work for women and LGBTQ and minorities. The work that ACLU are doing bringing cases against Trump administration now is amazing, and always has been, to be honest. RGB also argued successfully sex discrimination cases before she was in Supreme Court, and when a Supreme Court justice, she did advocate for gender equality and other rights. She also fought for Native Americans' rights, which I think is prophetically important. However, some say that RBG was a bit of an obstacle, I think, for Barack Obama because he wanted to put forth a democratic justice, didn't he, in his term? And some people said, oh, it's because RBG won't retire. But we know it was actually because of Mitch McConnell. He stopped Barack Obama saying, let's leave it to the people for the next president. And he also said it wasn't good to choose a court justice during an election year. I don't think Barack Obama would have chosen Ruth Bader Ginsburg anyway. Okay, lastly, on the Freedom of Choice Act, I just want to mention Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. Before the overturn of Roe, Congress had the constitutional authority to pass the Freedom of Choice Act under Section 5. So they could have passed it of the 14th Amendment. So, as I've said, it would have codified Roe and made it stronger for today. Section 5 grants Congress the power to enforce the provisions of the amendment through appropriate legislation. This means like Congress can create laws to ensure that the rights of the 14th Amendment are upheld by the state governments and individuals. And if it was ever determined that the 14th Amendment extends to personhood rights of the unborn, fetuses, I'm not 100% sure what part of the Section 5, but could be used to authorize Congress to pass laws that would protect the rights of the unborn, such as personhood laws, which would cause a nationwide abortion ban. Okay, any comments? I'm just going to move on. I'm just
Hi,
going to mention,
Natalie.
yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to, from what you have said, I've noticed that when democratic presidents are in office, we really expected them to, put laws that would favor women and LGBTQ, like really put them with authority. But it looked like it was not their priority, or they promise that they're going to do it, but then they don't. Is it a democracy failure? Because when you compare and contrast Republican presidents, they really push hard for what they want. And I don't know whether is it because democracy doesn't allow the democratic presidents, to push hard on these issues, or is it a weakness or a compromise? Because
Yeah, I get what you're
when you
saying.
look at it, it looks like they've failed. They have these presidents have failed to to secure policies for women and LGBTQ to make them firm.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I agree that, but I think it is a failure. It's a failure of the Sixth Kingdom to not protect equality, to not protect gender equality, abortion, and I think that I know there's only so much they can do even when they're in office, but I'm not sure if Biden could have done more because didn't they have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and when you've got that, can't you do a lot more? So I do feel like it was a complete failure. I'm not sure if you think it's not or not. Thanks, Rose.
Natalie, um,
Yeah.
quick question. So I had my hand up for a while now. Are you able to see the hands, or like do you want us to
No, I
unmute?
don't want to use hands because I
Oh,
want
I'm
to just,
sorry.
when I say I remember I said at the beginning, if there's a comment, when I say anyone got any comments, then have
Okay.
someone speak. So
Okay.
yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood that.
I can't
Yeah.
see.
So my question is about you mentioned that Obama codifying um abortion rights. Could you elaborate a little bit more? Maybe you mentioned it, but I didn't pick it up. But what would they do? Was that supposed to be an amendment or to the Constitution, or just a law passed by Congress?
I think it would be a law passed by Congress
Okay.
that would just codify Roe more strongly. I think that would have been, I think to make an amendment, it would be using Section 5. So maybe they could have done an amendment as well, because obviously the right of abortion is in the 14th Amendment. Um, but as we know from the overturn of Roe, 14th Amendment's quite weak with regards to abortion. It doesn't say. I'll go into that in a bit. I'm going to go on to Roe, the weaknesses of Roe, but I think it was just Freedom of Choice Act was just going to be a law that would codify Roe a little bit stronger, because it would
Hmm.
put in certain things with, to help a woman's life, save a life, and so forth.
And did you say that the abortion rights is in the 14th Amendment or is not?
Well, that's how it was passed in 1973 through the due process. I think they said it was the right of privacy. I think I've put it here on the board, and I think Curtis mentioned something else as well. I can't remember what he mentioned. I think he might have said liberty or something. So yeah, it's the right of abortion was in the 14th Amendment, but if you just wait a little bit more, I'll say why Roe was weak.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Natalie,
Yeah,
I know you got a lot
yeah,
to say, but do you think you could go a little bit more slower, please?
yes.
Thank you.
Just when I say any comments, is anything you want me to go back over, CG? Just let me know.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So where was I up to? So section 5. So I think in my last presentation, I was talking about the executive orders. I mentioned the executive order of 1468, and I think that is about the two biological genders. But that's not what stood out for me, even though that's very important for LGBTQ individuals, of course. What stood out for me was it defines life at conception rather than birth when it was talking about genders. So that stood out for me. I just wanted to mention that. For me, that was a dog whistle right there for fetal personhood rights in the future. So unless any comments about the Freedom of Choice Act, I'll just give a quick summary to help. So the Freedom of Choice Act would have made it harder at a state level for the ability to limit and regulate abortion. It was meant to codify Roe, establish a right for abortion for all women, including transgender women, non-binary. It was introduced in 1989, and since then it's had failures through different presidents. And I talked about the global gag rule today. That's here today. It was stopped by Biden, and then it was reinstated by second Trump presidency, the administration. And I compared and contrast slavery with the women getting out of state abortions and getting help to people getting arrested and so forth, and how the recently in January, I think, or sometime this year, the Alabama court case was restrained by the Supreme Court, so they couldn't arrest people for helping people get abortion. So let's go on to the weakness of Roe. Well, I'll just put Roe. Roe v. Wade. So in 1973, Roe v. Wade, a landmark case of the Supreme Court, established the right to abortion, stating that the laws at the time that restricted abortion were unconstitutional. So this is how Roe in 1973 gave women the right to choose an abortion. They said it was unconstitutional. Roe v. Wade gave the rights to an abortion, as I said, in the US up to the point where the fetus can survive outside the womb, widely regarded as 24 weeks gestation. However, it was only a matter of time that Roe would be overturned. So, in the famous leak draft by Justice Alito, he quoted, "Roe was wrong from the start. It is time to head the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people and its elected representatives." So that was Justice Alito from the Supreme Court, and we know that that was from the leaked document in 2021, I think, and it was overturned in 2022 in June. So let's just have we'll put a few points up for the weakness of Roe. We've mentioned one before, Curtis and I, we put the right to privacy. And that's from the 14th Amendment. It's been quoted that the right to privacy includes the right to abortion. We know that was overturned in 2022. But it's not. Why was it overturned? Why is the right to privacy so weak? And I think it's because it's not enumerated. So it's not explicitly enumerated, which just means listed in the Constitution. Ugh, my board's going to fall. I'll put listed. So I think that's the weakness of that first one. Second one, it's not listed in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, not explicitly says that you can have an abortion. The second one is what I was talking about before, was the trimester framework. And that's divided, the legal considerations are divided into 3 stages of pregnancy. So you have the first, the second, and the third trimesters. So it was criticised for misrepresenting, for example, fetal viability. It was misrepresented for fetal development. And maternal health. So what they were saying when they were overturning Roe is that there wasn't enough legal and medical principle to say that these things were important in Roe v. Wade in 1973. So some say that those things made Roe very weak. And then the last one. So this was about medical or legal principle.
Natalie, you know where you've got on the first one, is that supposed to be vital viability, or is it supposed to be fetal viability?
Sorry, where have I got it?
Under vital, under the trimester, you got vital viability, but is that, I could have sworn you said fetal viability. Or was it just me?
You're on about the second one.
Yeah, well, you got vital under there, just under trimester. What you've said there, was that supposed to be vital viability, or was it supposed to be fetal viability?
Hold on a minute, just check. Weakness of Roe.
It's fetal.
Yeah, sorry, I'm wondering where, I thought you said under 1. I
Yeah,
was looking at
yeah,
1
yeah, yeah, yeah,
here.
yeah.
Sorry.
That's what I thought you said. Sorry.
Thank you for correcting me. Yeah, I thought you mentioned 1. I couldn't find it on there. It's like, what? Thanks, Deb. So we've also on the third, sorry, my chair's just broken. The third one is fetus status. And for me, this is a big one for the future. So Roe did not define fetal personhood. So if Roe didn't find fetal personhood, or basically they didn't talk about how protecting the fetus outweighs a woman's right to choose an abortion. So example would be, does the life of the unborn outweigh the woman's right to choose? These weaknesses contributed to the eventual overturning, obviously, of Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs-Jackson Women's Health Organization, as I said, in 2022. The Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs concluded that the Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided and that the Constitution does not contain the right to abortion. So they're just, this is very basic study. So this is just 3 things that I think cause problems for Roe. We know Roe was overturned in some states in the South and the Midwest. With trigger laws went into action straight away, automatically. Basically, they had trigger laws on the books and they came into effect. That meant that women in those states, when Roe was overturned, immediately faced severe restrictions on their ability to have an abortion. And as I stated, they went from one state to another. I just want to go back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg because she had a lot to say about Roe. She thought it was very weak. She stated other things as well. She stated that bodily autonomy was most important for women to choose. RBG advocated for protecting the right through a broader lens of gender equality rather than solely relying on the right to privacy in the 14th Amendment. She saw the weakness in Roe way back, early days, 80s and 90s, and she knew that some cases in the future would be brought to the Supreme Court which could overturn Roe. She had great insight into gender equality, as we know.
So
RBG. Yeah.
That, so then, if she had that great insight, and you listed all these things that, why some of the cases were so weak, who is it that put these cases forward?
Which cases, sorry?
I'm talking about the abortion.
You mean who put the Dobbs case forward that overturned
Yeah,
Roe?
but who puts these cases forward on behalf
Well,
of women? Are they lawyers, or are they a group of
yeah, so it'd be
people?
lawyers. Yeah, I think it was Mississippi, wasn't it, Dobbs v. Jackson? It was an issue to do with a 15-week ban in Mississippi that was brought to Supreme Court, and they were arguing about that, and there was no right in the Constitution for abortion, and then the justices of the Supreme Court agreed. But
So
it was brought by Mississippi State.
yeah, so the people that did put it forward, they didn't have any kind of strength to the argument to
No.
for it to be accepted.
No, because if you look at the 14th Amendment, it doesn't explicitly, like I've said here, it's not enumerated or listed that you can have an abortion in the 14th Amendment. It's not explicitly saying that. It just says, you know, right to privacy and liberty, which back in the day of 1973, they said that, life, liberty is to do with making a choice. Women can do what they want. And back then there was no it was kind in 1973 there was kind of no fear politically really, or maybe about women's choices. And we've just come out of an era of the suffrages, I suppose, and it was more about the rights, and they didn't want to fight it then, so they allowed the 14th Amendment to give the right to women to have an abortion. But that soon changed. It took years for it to be overturned at the right moment. Everything's about the right time, the right moment. Is that okay, CJ?
A little bit, a little bit.
You
But
can you can always message me if you
yeah,
have a particular question about why and who and why it was overturned.
okay, thank you.
So RPG consistently emphasised that the right to equality, as I said, reproductive freedom is about gender equality, the right to abortion, sorry. She believes it's all about true agenda. She felt that protecting the right for a woman could have greater control, for abortion could have greater control over their lives to achieve true equality with men. So she believed she connected abortion rights, the right to choose, with gender equality and true equality with men. RGB also quoted, "When the government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than fully adult human, responsible for her own choices." So I'm going to compare again with slavery. We know in time of slavery, slaves were thought to be lesser human than their white counterparts. So I think RGB is saying that, if women don't have the right to choose about their own autonomy, they're kind of not as important as males, we'll say white males. Also, we should be aware that women that were slaves were being forced to have many babies as possible to help the slave trade. And sadly, many of these women had their babies snatched from them at birth. I like to compare slavery with the abortion issue. I'm just going to take a drink. Today, those on the far right and the pro-natalists, the tech lot, want to take away the rights of all women and recommend women have as many babies as possible. And it's the same old story: oppress women, help the economy, just like in the time of slavery. And today, although all women suffer, it's still the poor and a high percentage of black women that suffer the most. The question on reproductive freedom and freedom of itself is bound in the legislative debates in histories affecting black women's lives during slavery time in the United States. I'll say that again. The questions on reproductive freedom and freedom of itself is bound in the legislative debates and histories of affecting black women's lives during slavery. So it is to do with also, I think, the economy as well. In other words, within reach of the Supreme Court regarding the overturn of Roe v. Wade, Basically, did the Supreme Court justices fail to look or unpack the history to examine the debates and the constitutional origins of protecting women from involuntary reproductive servitude? A black woman's involuntary sexual and reproductive servitude were central to the debates that shaped the abolitionist discourse and activism and its political movement, including discrediting of slavery as a political, social, and economic enterprise. It's been said that the enterprise of America's reliance on slavery was black women's reproductive labor. Thomas Jefferson was once known as to have stated, "I know no more error, more consuming to an estate, than that stocking farms with men almost exclusively, I consider a woman who brings in a child every 2 years as more profitable." What was Thomas Jefferson famous for? Anyone know? Wasn't it Thomas Jefferson, Curtis, that wrote the Declaration of Independence, championing universal rights?
Yep, that's correct.
So he was champion universal rights, thanks Curtis, while holding 600 slaves, and was quoted saying slavery was an abominable crime. He believed in inherent rights, the rights of individuals, so he said he did, including the life of and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. So what a contradiction is that? Any comments?
Natalie,
Yeah.
the statement you just read, does it is it meaning that Thomas Jefferson wanted women to give birth every 2 years to continue the slaves he had
Yes.
on his property? Like, it was more profitable for a woman to give birth because that would add more slaves to his, like, numbers of slaves.
Yes.
Sad. Okay.
So I found out why he kept slaves. It's not justifiable, obviously, but as Natalie pointed out, he was an abolitionist but had slaves because he had inherited a huge amount of debt from his father. And so he owned this plantation from his father. And if he had let go of that, he would have essentially gone to prison. If he had gone into debt, because he wouldn't be able to pay his debtors. And so he essentially kept enslaved people to save his own skin. So he didn't believe in the continuation of the practice of slavery. Um, so he didn't want to perpetuate it, but he kept slaves on his farms because, yeah, to avoid going to prison himself.
Yeah, thanks, Curtis. I agree he probably didn't want to. And I didn't know that extra information. Thank you. Right. My
I was going to
computer just
say,
shut down.
plus,
Yeah?
yeah, I was going to say, and plus he had children from a slave himself. 6 of them, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think as well, many people justified keeping slaves because they said we treat them nicely and we need someone to do the work. So it was, they justified it because they said we don't treat them badly. Again, it's not justification, but they might have argued they're better with us than they are with someone who's going to treat them badly. And where are they going to go? There's that kind of the arguments, some of the arguments they were using. Yeah.
The right wingers will say, we treat women really nicely. We're going to give them really some prosperity and,
Exactly.
windfall. Yeah. Thank you for your contributions. I'm not sure if you noticed in the anti-abortion rallies just before the overturn of Roe in 2022, some of the protesters were wearing Confederate gloves and flags. Just thought I'd mention that. Okay, lastly, I want to mention what some say was a historic event that happened during the COVID crisis regarding nations coming together with regards to women's health and the right to abortion. And this was called the Geneva Consensus Declaration. Oh, I'm not very good at straight line. It was initially launched or pushed through on October 22nd, 2020 during COVID. But the lockdown, it was done by the Trump and Pence administration. The purpose, the objective, the aim was to create. So the purpose was to create a coalition where have I put it? Purpose was no. It was to create a coalition of nations or countries to support pro-life, pro-family. What does that sound like? Sounds like the right wing. And pro-woman policies. I won't go into what that means. Although it promotes women's health and strengthens family, it's an anti-abortion. So it's anti-abortion. This declaration. It's also it defends the life of the unborn. And is an international document. Oh my, there's not much room here. It was held in the United States. They co-hosted it as a virtual sign and ceremony due to COVID. There was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who participated in the sign and ceremony of the Geneva Consensus Declaration. The Health and Human Services Secretary was also there. Obviously, this is back in 2020, so it's different now. We know we've got Kennedy, who's the health service person today, but back then it was Alex Azar II. Mike Pompeo gave praise to Trump and stated that we have mounted an unprecedented defense of the unborn abroad. Representatives from 34 countries signed the GCD document on the day and spoke of what it meant for them. So I've listened to the video. You can see it on YouTube, and they say some really interesting things. Each country speaks a little bit about what they're signing. As of 2025, so today, we have 40 signatories or countries who've signed. Like, obviously, that's what it means. Who've joined. So we have 40 who have joined this GCD. Obviously, it's a slow progress. We've got 195 countries in the world. I think Biden administration, he repudiated the declaration when he came in. And then in the second Trump term, when that began, the State Department announced immediately the intention to rejoin the so-called Geneva Consensus Declaration, which claims that there is no international right to an abortion. So it claims no international right to abortion. I think that's a big statement. The Geneva Consensus affirms that every human being has an inherent right of life and declares that there is no international obligation to promote or fund an abortion. So everybody that signed this agreed. Everybody that signed also agrees on two genders as well. By rejoining the GCD, and reinstating the Mexico City policy, the global gag rule, some have said that the United States is committing to advancing pro-life stance on the world stage. Any comments about the Geneva Consensus Declaration so far? No? I think it's an important point of my study, and I was interested in making a comment. So if there's no comments, I've already given a summary on Freedom of Restoration Act, and I mentioned Section 5 could be used to codify, could have been used to codify Roe, right of abortion, and I also mentioned it could be used with in a negative way, Section 5 and the 14th Amendment regards to personhood rights. I mentioned the weakness of Roe. I mentioned the global gag rule, and finally, I just mentioned obviously the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which is anti-abortion international coalition written up by Trump's first administration, and how they rejoined in Trump's second term, and that was in January 2025, saying that there's no right to international abortion, and it mentions the rights of the unborn. Now, it does state in the declaration that it's not binding, but it does mention some kind of punishment. It doesn't go into it, so obviously states can pull out of this if they wanted to, but it's here and now, and there's 40 signatories so far since January 2025. Any comments? I could hear someone on mute.
Yeah, and Natalie, that's the thing I wanted to find out. That is it binding? Because if, excuse me, if it's global like this and 40 countries have signed, I think it's really big,
Yeah.
and it's at a large scale that nations are officially coming together to oppress women and their liberties and their choice of what they want to do with their body. In as much as it says pro women policies, I really wanted to find out what's pro women policies when in the
Yes.
same breath you um oppressing their choice, So maybe I need to
Yeah.
look at this declaration as well for myself, maybe try to really understand. But just from the summary you gave, it looks like um there's no pro women policies there. So
No. And
yeah.
I thought it was interesting, without getting conspiracy theories or anything, I thought it was interesting that they pushed it through in a crisis when COVID-19 was happening, and it was online, and they were wearing masks, obviously, Mike and Alex. But things like this, important things do get pushed through crisis. And I didn't even know this was going on, and during a crisis, you wouldn't, would you? So I think it could be important. And like you said, the pro women policies, yeah, explanation marks. What are they? Um, and there was something else you reminded me of. Uh, and I said it wasn't binding, but with all these tariffs and everything, um, that could make a lot of things binding. And that would include this, really, because if they pull out of things that the Trump administration or the USA is not happy about, this they wouldn't dare pull out of this in case they lose money with the tariffs or whatever. I don't know how it will work out, but I think it's quite a significant, as someone stated in the news, it's a historic event. I think even Mike Pay said that. Is there someone put a message in the chat? Can whoever's in charge, can they read it out to me, please? Thank you.
Can I just quickly say before that's read out, it seems like the framework for "and the land of Egypt shall not escape."
Yes. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, it was Debbie, and she said many of the signatories came from liberal authorities or authoritarian governments.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, but I didn't want to, force or press the point home too much. You can do your own research, and they are all kind of authoritarian. They don't believe in LGBTQ. They don't believe in gender equality. Yeah, thanks, Deb. Any other comments? Okay, so for me, I think our great test is about abortion rights, women's autonomy, women having autonomy. I think the root of equality for women stems around this and around personhood, also in the future. The overturn of Roe was just the start. I think it's going to get a lot worse, and I feel that the world will follow it in the footsteps of the USA, and I think they're already doing it. To receive the mark of the beast is to advocate for the same ideas that the beast has done. Who said that? So that was Ellen G. White, I think, in 1851, Review and Herald, July the 13th. She said that to receive the mark of the beast is to advocate for the same ideas that the beast has done. Any further comments? You might want to go and think about how can abortion, personhood rights be our great test. I know it's about gender equality, but it's much more deeper than that. And you might want to think, how will that hit home to me personally, sitting in the UK or sitting wherever? But it will. And plus, what are the 144,000 here for? Just to sit by and watch and teach each other? It's more than that. Can someone tell me what's said in the chat? Thanks.
Yeah, I would say that we'd have to speak out when that time happens, especially in our own nation. We know what's going in other nations, but I think if it happened in our own nation, I would suspect that we'd have to speak out about it, or rise up against it.
Yes.
We've got to have a voice somewhere.
Yes. So you, even if you haven't got any family, any daughters, or trans individuals, non-binary, anyone who's been infected, one, we have to give the message, the loud cry, which is a gender equality, and I think it's to do with abortion and personal rights. And two, if it comes personal to your own area, you will have to speak out, and I'm sure you might come across where you might have to help someone. It will affect us, even though we think this is just an American thing. I don't believe that's so. Any other comments? This is something in the chat from Richard.
I just posted that part of the verse.
Oh, thank you, Richard. If there's no other questions, I know it's a bit early, I will close with prayer and then we can discuss more if you want afterwards. Is that all right?
Yes, yes.
I did already give my quick summary. So I talked about the Freedom of Choice Act. I've talked about the weaknesses of Roe, how it was overturned, and how things could look in the future regards and reproductive rights and women's rights. And I could see this becoming, part of the death decree as well, those who help women, gender equality. I'm going to close now and I will pray if you want to kneel. Dear Almighty God, we thank you for a Sabbath where we can come together and we can worship you. We can put the cares of the world aside. There are many things rapidly happening in the world. There's some things happening that maybe we're not aware of yet. For me, me finding also what happened in 2020 with the coalition of the Geneva consensus declaration, just little things like that could become huge. We just don't know. We have to get our lives in order. We have to stand for gender equality. We have to know what the root of it is. We have to practice it in our lives and question ourselves. Are we truly not just understanding the message, but are we living it? We pray, Lord, that you will be with all those who are being oppressed, who are already losing family members due to the oppression of the United States and others around the world with regards to reproductive health. We pray that you will continue to be with us this Sabbath. We pray that you will pour upon us the latter rain. You will help us to be good stewards in your kingdom, and let us unite and fight the good fight. I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.